Hello, everyone. Apparently, I'm live. Hello. Hope you're all well. I hope you can see and hear me okay. I'm just going to share my slides. Here we go. A little bit less of me, a little bit more of Egypt. That seems good, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay, good. Hello. Yeah, hope you can all see and hear me. Let me know if not. Good to see so many of you already in the chat. And hello, Amy. Hi, Rosemarie. Seeing Rosemarie reminds me. Thank you all for being here on the revised date for this talk. Rosemarie and Neil, I think you may have been waiting for me yesterday evening, in which case I'm very sorry. And if that was the case for any of the others of you, I'm very sorry to you too. I had to change the date for this talk. Some of you will know, I think. I've just got so much on at the moment. Being a freelancer, work is sometimes a bit like the buses. You wait for one for ages and then everything comes along at once. Although, having said that, although this is as busy as I ever am at the moment, it was exactly like this last year. So maybe it's just that September is my busiest time and I just have to get used to that. Anyway, good to be busy. But yeah, I needed a bit of extra time. I was in Pisa earlier this week giving a lecture on Tuesday and I didn't get back until quite late Wednesday evening. And although I'd done some of the prep for this talk beforehand, I tend to do things in order, which meant that I didn't have very long to prep this. And guess what? I was still prepping and leaving stuff out that I hadn't had a chance to cover in my slides a matter of minutes ago. Anyway, for some reason, I'm a bit more relaxed about this than I sometimes am. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Anyway, we'll see. So thanks everybody for being here. So hello, as I mentioned, hello Amy, hello Rosemarie, hi Linda, from a darkening and cold London. Yeah, yep, pretty gloomy outside my window here. It's funny, I think this is the first talk I've done from this new home of mine in this spot, which still looks just as messy and untidy behind me as it ever does. But it's the first time I've done it when I don't have to worry that the sun is going to start setting beneath my window and bleaching me out. So all the lights are already on in the room, and I think we'll probably be doing gloomy lectures now in this slot for the next few months. Anyway, less gloomy slides, hopefully. So yeah, hello Angela, hello Bjorn from Swansea. Oh, I think somebody's may have started a degree in Swansea, if I'm right about that. I hope it's going well. Bjorn, good luck with it all. Keep us posted. Hi Trish, looking forward to visiting a few of these places in a few weeks' time. Yeah, yes, absolutely, Trish. It's not a coincidence that I'm doing this talk now. Given that I need to be prepping some stuff for lectures in Egypt when we go and look for missing cities. Chris Morgan knows all about this too. Yeah, you're right. We didn't find the missing cities. Maybe I would mind less if we found the missing cities, actually, Chris, because there's no book to be ruined about this. The kind of terrible truth is that I don't want those lost tombs to get found because it'll spoil my book. Hello, Anna. Hi, Joyce. Hello. Oh, blimey, there's lots of people I'm not going to have time to say hello to because I'm behind and we've got to start. Hello, Anne in Baltimore. Marie, Amelia, hi. Hello, David. Hi, Arthur. Hello, Jerome. Hi, Kate. Do I watch now when we get back? Kate, why don't you carry on watching now and then just see how much I'm able to improve the talks by the time we're in Egypt. Hi, Richard. Hi, Stephanie. Hello, Sunflower. Hi, Chrissy. Hi, Jamie. Hello. I owe you an email, don't I? I'll get to it. I will. Oh, by the way, though, in answer to your question, Jamie, and also John, yes, just need to fix the date, don't we? Hi, Jill. Hello, Iris. Right, and I think I'm at the bottom of the list. Okie dokie. Right, so yeah. Little bit behind schedule. Sorry, folks. So missing cities. here we are. Anybody know which city that's actually not missing? This is on the screen. I wonder if anyone spotted it. It's Tanis, which we're going to be visiting slightly later in the talk. I thought a satellite image was quite a good image for this talk, because Egyptian cities, particularly in the Delta, settlement sites, archaeological sites, are often quite visible as these sort of brown splodges. I may have talked about this before, but I mean, I like nothing more than looking at maps and satellite images, particularly of Egypt. And if you go to the Delta and zoom in enough or zoom out enough, you'll see these grids of fields, field boundaries, and then occasionally sort of lighter brown grey areas, which are modern villages and towns, cities in some cases. And then when you see a sort of muddy looking splodge like this is often a protected archaeological site, so no agriculture or modern construction on these areas. And the brownish mud is indeed often exactly that, and usually a mixture of delta soil, but also ancient mud brick. These sites are often tell sites, tell being the Arabic word for a mound, or one of the words for mound that get used in archaeological sites. Think Tel Daba and Tel Maskuta, and so on and so on. And these mounds are formed of the gradual accumulation of layers of construction over centuries. So they're visible in the satellite images. They're also often visible on the ground. The delta is otherwise very flat. But these mounds are often, where they haven't been denuded, appear on the horizon, if you like. So very visible, and this is exactly the kind of thing that we might be looking for in our quest for missing cities. So, just by way of an explanation for how this idea came about, you may already know, or you may already have guessed, that it's kind of a continuation of the idea of searching for lost tombs, which of course was the subject of a book of mine a while ago. You will be sick to death of me talking about this, no doubt, by now. And an obvious follow-up, I think, in some ways, which I've been thinking about for years, is to do lost cities. And it's not just a case of telling a kind of archaeological story, but there are themes that are common both to the idea of missing tombs, lost tombs, and missing cities, lost cities as well. So where with the lost tombs idea, I realized when I was asked if I'd like to write a book that I'd been gathering these stories of half a dozen or so tombs which belonged to well-known people. And I'm sure you know this story by now, forgive me, but just in case there's anybody who hasn't heard me tell it. So there are these half a dozen or so tombs which are missing. They belong to well-known people. They must have existed. And I also knew that there would be stories we could tell of archaeological expeditions to find them, or archaeological problems, some of which might have been solved. So actually in the book Lost Tombs, I do also tell the story of tombs that have been found, along with talking about tombs that are yet to be found. And so the same really is the case with our lost cities. I've got rather more than half a dozen in the case of the lost cities, and I haven't yet got any plans to write a book. So for the purposes of this lecture and for the trip that some of us are going to be going on in a few weeks' time, this is really about sort of gathering a number of stories and seeing how they work in all these different ways. So sorry about this, folks. You're kind of guinea pigs a bit here, both in terms of the lecture and those of you coming on the tour. I guess I'd like your help really in finding out how these stories work. Are they compelling stories? As with, by the way, as with the lost tombs idea, there has to be a story. There are tombs that are missing, about which very little can be said, and the same is true of our cities as well. So even in the case of some major cities, some very important cities, some of them are so lost, if you like, that there's just almost nothing to say. So those probably wouldn't make the cut in a book. Anyway, and I hope that's not the case with any of the cities we're going to be dealing with today. But you can let me know at the end if you feel as though anything should be cut. What do we say here? Yeah, so I guess our starting point, a little bit like with the tombs, there's a starting point in that most of the tombs I was talking about belong to pharaohs, and we have a reasonably these days definitive list of pharaohs. And if you think about those as that list as being like a checklist of tombs, we know that they all must have had a tomb. The majority of them, at least those who ruled during strong and stable periods of Egyptian history, will have had quite grand tombs. Many of those have survived. The focus of the book was really on the conspicuous gaps. And we've got a similar situation for cities in that we know of the major cities, in some cases archaeologically, but in many cases, first of all, at least from texts. And part of the job of archaeology in the last 2 centuries has been this is something else I'm always banging on about, sorry about this, but is to take what we knew from classical sources. So for history and king lists, we might think about Manetho, and I'm going to be talking about Manetho as usual in just a little bit. But for towns and cities, we can also fall back on other classical accounts by writers like Strabo is a particular favourite of mine, who provides us with a kind of itinerary of important places in Egypt from the time he visited. And that source and others together can be combined to give us like a checklist of cities, if you like. And archaeologists have found a number of those, but not all of them, or not certainly. So some of these cities remain missing, and as the last paragraph says here, in some cases there have been some quite interesting stories about how people have looked for these things, and whether or not they or why they haven't found them, or whether or not they might even have found them without knowing for sure. So there are several different ways, I think, of approaching this this subject. One of them is, I'm afraid, to go to Manetho, because along with giving us our dynasties of kings, lists of names of those kings, he also tells us where each of the dynasties ruled from, thereby giving us, even if we think it's flawed in some places, a sort of starting point for where the capital was at each period in Egyptian history for each dynasty. As I say, we can add to this other sources of information. Of course, we've got an abundance of material of all kinds, particularly texts, both ancient Egyptian texts and also later Greek texts, which talk about the major cities in Egypt, Heliopolis, Memphis, Thebes, Alexandria, and so on and so on and so on. So, Manetho. I hope you're not fed up with Manetho yet. He's so important and so interesting, I think, anyway. So this is the sort of thing that Manetho gives us, and you're probably pretty familiar with this. Whenever I've talked about Manetho in the last few lectures, it's usually been the names of kings and this aspect of the history and events that I've been most interested in. But as you'll see here, he does also tell us something about geography. So for Dynasty 1, he says, in succession to the spirits of the dead, the demigods, the first royal house numbers 8 kings. This is the first dynasty, of course, the first of whom, Menes of This, ruled for 62 years, reigned for 62 years. There's a bit more information about the first dynasty, which I've cut out here. Skipping ahead to the next dynasty. The second dynasty consists of 9 kings of This, same place. The third dynasty comprised 9 kings of Memphis, apparently a change. Interestingly enough, so it's the bare bones in terms of the information he provides, but there's something here for us to go on. And in fact, he tells us where each of these lines of kings are for the entire 30 dynasties of his history, what still we regard as our dynastic or pharaonic Egyptian history. And even just looking at the list of capital cities from these periods, it's quite interesting to note the way the capital shifts. So in what we would now call the early dynastic period, the first and second dynasties, the capital was apparently at this place called This. In the Old Kingdom, or at the beginning of the Third Dynasty, it moved to Memphis. And of course, Memphis is a very important city, remains an important city, if not the capital, for the whole of the rest of Egyptian history. This, and Memphis, of course, is very famous as well, if only because it's the city that's associated with the great royal cemeteries of the Old Kingdom, the pyramid fields of Giza, Abusir, Saqqara, and so on. So Memphis was the capital in the Third and Fourth Dynasties. The Fifth Dynasty, according to Manetho at least, it moved to Elephantine. That doesn't tally with what we know these days. That's a bit difficult to explain. Memphis would seem more appropriate for the kings of the Fifth Dynasty, all of them buried in the Memphite cemeteries, albeit in a new place at Abusir. And they became sun worshippers. It seems most likely that they were based in Memphis, so this is some bit of confusion on Manetho's part, perhaps. In any case, by the Sixth Dynasty, he has the throne returning to Memphis. The same is the case in the Seventh and Eighth Dynasties. There's then a change, or well, for the Ninth and Tenth Dynasties, the location of the capital is somewhere else. At Heracleopolis, a little way to the south in the region of the Fayum, as we'll see. In fact, we understand now this period, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th dynasties, to have been the first intermediate period, a period during which the central authority in Egypt collapsed and the country was split. So in fact, these are probably rival groups, one at Memphis, a continuation of the Old Kingdom line, and a rival breakaway kingdom centered on Heracleopolis a little way to the south. The first intermediate period is in fact brought to an end by another line of kings, initially ruling only in their region in the south, but ultimately coming to take over the country and reunify it. And that line originated in and was based in the city that Manetho calls Diospolis, which we know better as Thebes, which is located in modern-day Luxor, of course. By the way, I should say, all these names, as given by Manetho, are the Greek forms of these cities. So they would have had at least slightly different, if not totally different, names in the periods that Manetho was writing about. But of course, Manetho was writing in the early Ptolemaic, when Greek was the language of scholarship and the international language, the language of the pharaohs of the time. And so these places were all coming to be known by new Greek names, lots of something polises, polis being the Greek word for city, of course. So Thebes, by this point, known as Diospolis, earlier on, of course, in the time of the 11th and 12th dynasties, as Waset. According to Manetho, well, if you look at this list, everything gets a little bit confused in the second intermediate period. But if you recall my lecture from a couple of sessions ago on this period and the Hyksos kings, this is another of these periods when the central administration collapses and you get fragmentation within the country. So it's no surprise that we see lots of different capital cities represented here. And in fact, again, this is a time when these lines, the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th lines, were not didn't follow one another in a nice sort of continuous sequence. They overlapped. And of course, we're still arguing about the extent to which they overlapped. But it seems likely that the 13th dynasty, which Manetho here has as ruling from Diospolis, we might think of them more as having been based further north at a place called Itj-tawy. We'll see a bit more about that in just a second, or possibly as far north as Memphis. They probably overlapped with a line of kings from Canaan, the first group that might fall under the general heading Hyksos, who were based at Zois in the delta, the central delta. The 15th dynasty, who Manetho calls shepherd kings, who were based in the Sephroite nome. That's the 14th Upper Egyptian nome, and we'll look at the division of the country into these administrative units, nomes, in just a bit too. they founded a town. That town we know was called Avaris, and indeed Avaris, we now know, was located in the 14th nome, which is in the eastern part of the delta. Manetho and our archaeological and textual evidence doesn't quite agree for the last couple of dynasties here. Manetho has the 16th as shepherd kings. They probably were. But in a different version of Manetho's text, and so far I've used the version from Africanus, which is generally held to be the most reliable. The Eusebius version of Manetho has the 16th dynasty as coming from Thebes. There's still a bit of arguing going on about where the 16th dynasty were based and what the nature of that line might be. Manetho has the 17th as shepherd kings, another line of Hyksos. We these days, on the basis of the archaeological evidence, would have the 17th as certainly being based in Thebes. So there's that may explain the confusion between the Africanus and Eusebius versions. The New Kingdom lines are all based in Thebes, Diospolis, Waset, 18th, 19th, and 20th. We then again got a bit of movement in the next of our confusing periods, the third intermediate period. So Manetho has the 21st ruling at Tanis, the 22nd at Bubastis, the 23rd again at Tanis. He has the 24th at Saïs, the 25th. He doesn't actually give a place of origin or a place of capital city, but he says 3 Ethiopian kings. And in fact, we know that the 25th dynasty line of Ethiopian or better Kushite kings, capital city was way down in Sudan in the region of the 4th capital at Napata. I did think about including Napata in my list for today's lecture, but it's not made the cut. Napata itself, the location of Napata itself is not certainly known. It's almost certainly in the region of Jebel Barkal, where the Kushites' main temple of Ammon is to be found. But the city itself has not been identified archaeologically, so it is missing. It could count. It could be on the list. Let me know if you think it should go back in. And then in the last 5 dynasties of dynastic Egypt, Saïs again is preeminently important in the 26th dynasty. No location given for the 27th, but Manetho tells us they were 8 Persian kings, so they would have had their capital city elsewhere outside the country, as with the Kushites. Saïs retains the crown after the Persians sort of withdrew. They were struggling to contain their grip on the country and were ruling through deputies called satraps. So their grip on Egypt, they never occupied Egypt in that sense. They ruled through either native Persians who they'd installed there, or local Egyptian rulers who were approved by the Persian regime. So it's not a great surprise, perhaps, that they relinquished their grip temporarily, which allowed a line at Saïs to re-establish itself as Manetho's 28th dynasty, then a line at Mendes in the Delta, another Delta city in the 29th, and then yet another Delta city, Sebennytos, in the 30th dynasty. So there we go. Actually, lots of movement. And although, as I say, we think now that probably Manetho didn't get things absolutely right in all cases, he's not too far off. And in any case, the general point that the capital city moves around as one group within Egypt comes to power is good, and it's a good reflection of the way that things change that way through dynastic history, I think. So we might add a few capital cities to Manetho's list. So for his Middle Kingdom, you'll recall, he has the 11th dynasty in Thebes. We're sure that's right. He has the 12th dynasty also in Thebes, but we rather think that actually a new capital city was established under the 12th dynasty kings, possibly from the time of the first king, Amenemhat I. That may have been one of the reasons, in fact, why there was thought to be a break between the 11th and 12th, even if Manetho wasn't quite aware of this, to a new capital called Itj-tawy, and we'll have a look at that in just a little bit. As we know, as you will know, I'm sure, during the 18th dynasty, there was a brief hiatus in well, a sort of an extreme break with all norms under Amenhotep IV, Akhenaten, of course, who moved the capital city to a new location in Middle Egypt at the site we now refer to as Tel el-Amarna. Akhenaten and his immediate successors were deliberately forgotten, certainly by the time of the 19th dynasty. Their names and all memory of them was lost and not recorded, therefore, in Manetho, so it's not surprising that he would not be aware of Tel el-Amarna either. And in fact, as you will, I'm sure, probably know by now, once Akhenaten and his successors' entirely different way of doing everything had come to an end, the site of his capital city, Akhet-Aten at Tel el-Amarna, was completely abandoned, and so it's not recorded by anybody like Strabo either. So all knowledge, not only of Akhenaten, the other people involved, but also his great capital city, wasn't rediscovered until the 1820s. Interestingly enough, you know, although Manetho isn't obviously very aware of the chaos of the Third Intermediate Period from the way that he writes his history, you get a sense perhaps of the fact that there's something funny going on just from the way the capital city moves around during this time. Unsurprisingly, he wasn't aware of the full complexity of the picture. So we might, in fact, add to these here. Add to these capitals Thebes, which was probably the base of an independent line of Upper Egyptian kings, which included Takeloth II and Azorkon III and a handful of others as well. Again, scholars are, I'm sure you'll know, if you've heard my lectures on this period, you will. Scholars are still arguing about exactly which kings and how many of them should be put into this independent line. If they weren't based at Thebes, incidentally, and they were certainly in control of a part of Upper Egypt, we're not exactly sure how much of it. If it wasn't that Thebes was their base, then it will have been at either Hermopolis or Herakleopolis, a little further to the north. So we might add those two in as well. Manetho was writing in the early Ptolemaic period. We're not exactly sure when, but it may even have been early enough that Alexandria wasn't really established as the capital city by this point. But of course, in the Ptolemaic, it would become the capital city, and it would remain the capital until the establishment of Fustat after the Arab conquest, not very far away from the next site in our list, which is Babylon, which was established as a Roman fortress, and that fortress eventually gives rise to Fustat, and Fustat eventually gave rise to Cairo, which of course is the modern capital city. I was hoping to deal with Babylon, Fustat, and Cairo today, but again, I'm afraid they haven't made the cut. That's really just to do with having too much to cram into this talk and not enough time in the last few days. But I will get there at a certain point. I'll deal with it in another lecture at some point. The last site, which isn't really a capital city, but nonetheless a very important place, is Antinopolis, which was a site, a city established by Hadrian to commemorate the death of his beloved Antinous, who drowned nearby. So straight away, we've got a pretty decent list of sites that are, over the last couple of centuries, archaeologists would have been very pleased to find and to go and investigate. Ancient Egyptian sources provide us with lots of information about not only capital cities, but the division of the country into administrative districts called nomes, and each of these nomes had a capital city of its own. And we have lists of these nomes, which were established very early on in ancient history and obtained right the way through the dynastic period and right down into the Ptolemaic. There was a kind of shake-up in the Ptolemaic, which meant that the boundaries and the lists shifted a little. The lists that I'm going to be going over now are the original lists. The country is divided into two sets of nomes, one for Upper Egypt and one for Lower Egypt. And here is a little of what we know of them. So, of course, things are really very straightforward in Upper Egypt in the Nile Valley. Upper Egypt as far as Memphis, which is in the first of the northern Lower Egyptian nomes, and because it's really only the river and the narrow strip of agricultural land either side of it that is inhabitable in the Nile Valley, and the boundaries essentially are just sort of like lines in the river every so often. So you can see those illustrated here, and the system starts at the first cataract, right down in the south, a little way to the south of what's now the city of Aswan, which is also more or less in exactly the same place as the ancient city of Elephantine on the island in the river. And the first cataract, of course, is one of a series of these rocky cataracts which form a kind of natural boundary in the river. So this was an obvious and natural point for Egypt's southern frontier, and it remains a sort of boundary even now. The modern political boundary between Egypt and Sudan to the south is now in the region of the second cataract, actually. And in fact, that also to some extent reflects the ancient situation, because the territory to the south of the second cataract in ancient times was, for most of what's dynastic Egypt in Egypt, was Kushite territory. The next door kingdom was Kush, even if it didn't use that name at all periods. And then the area in between the first and second cataracts was more like a kind of frontier region, much less habitable, occupied by mostly migrating groups who went by various names. But Egypt proper starts at the first cataract and heads north. So the first nome of Upper Egypt is the nome of that the very southernmost nome, the nome that Elephantine and Aswan are included in. So zooming in a bit, this is the first 10 of the Upper Egyptian nomes. So going south to north, following the flow of the river, of course, we have Bowland, Tarseti, which is often in fact used as a name for Nubia, which gives you a sense of the fact that although this is a part of Egypt proper, its character is influenced to some extent by the Nubian people who would have occupied that sort of boundary first, second cataract territory, but also clearly had an influence in Egypt proper here too. The capital there is Elephantine. The second nome is the nome of Edfu. The third of Hermopolis, one of the very most important early dynastic sites, of course. The fourth is the name of Luxor, modern day Luxor, ancient Thebes. There's a star in the map at that point there. The fifth is the name of Coptos, the center of worship of the Ithyphallic god Min, the creator god Min. Sixth is Crocodile Land. That is the name of the Temple of Dendra, Temple of Hathor at Dendra. Sistrum land comes next. This is the area of the ancient city, another Diospolis, not the Theban Diospolis, but Diospolis Parva, which in modern times is known as Hu. Flinders Petrie excavated there around the beginning of the 20th century. Next up is what's called the Great Land. This was the location of that city, This or Thinis, the capital, according to Manetho, of the first and second dynasties. That's also the nome of Abydos. We'll be looking at that more closely in a second. Working our way northwards, further downriver, we have the nome of modern-day Akhmim, which was Panopolis in Greek times, another Min cult center. And then Cobra Land, Antinopolis in Greek and Roman times, Gao El Kabir in modern times. Following on, we have the nome, number 11 is the nome of Shas Hotep, the city of Shas Hotep, Shutub in modern times. Viper Mountain Land, Upper Sycamore and Viper Land, that's the nome of modern day city of Asyut. Lower Sycamore and Viper Land, which is the nome of Kusi El Qusiyya. This is where the tombs of Mer, for any of you who knows those tombs are. The Mer tombs are the tombs of high officials of Qusi. Hairland, which is the region of the city of Hermopolis. On the Oryx nome, Anubis land is the name of the city of Sinopolis of Greek times. Nempty land, the place of Chuzoi, Hutnesut, in modern times El Heba. At this point, we're into the region of the boundary between southern and northern Egypt of the period of the Third Intermediate period. So El Heba was a fortified town. Substantial Third Intermediate period remains there. Very important group of papyri found there a little while ago. Suffered very badly in the revolution, actually, from illegal excavations. It's a very rich site that's still by no means fully excavated. We then, moving further north into the region of, closing in on Fayum, we have Two Scepters land, which is the name of Oxyrhynchus, where the great, enormous discovery of papyrus fragments was made, modern Bahnazar. Then southern Sycamore land is the name of Heracleopolis, modern day Ichnasia. Northern Sycamore land is Crocodilopolis, which is underneath modern Fayum city in the center of the Fayum, which of course was expanded very greatly under the Middle Kingdom kings and then again in the Ptolemaic. And then the northernmost of the Upper Egyptian nomes is Knife land, the nome of the city of Aphroditopolis. Atfi, another place that yielded significant quantities of papyrus. We're then into Lower Egypt, the southernmost nome of which is the nome of Memphis, which is shown with the star here at the head of the delta, the point at which the river splits. That's not a coincidence, of course. That is a sort of junction point that allows access not only to Upper Egypt and to the Nile Valley, but to all these various different places in the richest part of the country, the most productive agriculturally, the Delta, which in modern times is fed by only really two major branches of the Nile and then a million irrigation channels that have been artificially constructed over the years. Whereas in ancient times, there were many more branches, as you can see from this map. So Memphis is the point at which all these various different branches of the river converge, and it was said to be at the balance of the two lands. So not a surprise that Memphis should be where it is, and it was the capital of the first of the Lower Egyptian nomes. It's called here, and I've taken these translations, by the way, actually from Wikipedia. They are sometimes translated in various different ways. So just in case you've spotted any that are sometimes translated differently, White Walls nome is one word for the nome of Memphis. White Walls in Inabu Hedge is one of the names for Memphis itself. We think this might relate to the white plastered walls of the city itself. I have heard it suggested that in actual fact, the escarpment that leads up to the west of the city leads up onto the Saqqara Plateau. The cliffs might actually, they're now completely more or less covered with drift sand in most places, but they might have been more exposed in ancient times and may in fact have been white walls, as it were, which may be where the name comes from. The delta then, of course, is much more complicated than the Nile Valley, of course, it's completely lost to us now who it was who decided how to order all of the different nomes. This is the first 11. I've just highlighted, I've just emboldened a few here that seem particularly significant. So most obviously Memphis, but also we've already heard that the fifth nome, which is in the west, there you can see Saïs on the map, is the location of Saïs, which was the capital in the 24th. Well, 24th is part of the Third Intermediate period. Certainly 26th and 28th dynasties, and then Zois in the 6th nome is also mentioned by Manetho as being the capital of the 14th dynasty kings. Not clear whether or not he was right about that. There are some other very important cities in there as well. Again, for the remaining nomes, I've just highlighted some of the ones that seem to be the most important. So eastmost land is the name of the 13th dynasty, 13th dynasty, 13th nome. This is the Sethroite nome, which is where we find Avaris located. I'm beginning to think that actually there's a mistake in the numbering here. That should be 14th, not 13th. Sorry about that, folks. Fishland is the name of the nome that Mendes of the 29th dynasty can be found in. And then a little way sort of south and west from there, we have Bubastis, Manetho's capital of the 22nd dynasty, and then up right in the northeastern delta is the site of Tanis, a little way north of Avaris, the capital of the 21st and, so Manetho tells us, the 23rd dynasties. And as we'll see a little while later, actually a lot of these names and a lot of the cities that are mentioned as nome capitals here were the seat of somebody very important, and in some cases kings, particularly during this period, Third Intermediate period, where you will remember, if you've heard me speak about this before, it was a time when there were lots and lots of kings all over the place. So arguably lots of these places were capitals of one sort or another. So although I could perhaps at some point will write a very long book about all these different places, for the purposes of the talk here, I'm just going to pick out some that I think there are interesting things to say about. You can tell me whether or not I've got that right at the end of the talk. So, so I've pulled out here. This is a map of the sites that were mentioned by Manetho, and then with a few others added in as well. So actually, just looking at this map, you can see that there's the greatest concentration of significant places is up in the delta, and I think this does reflect several things. Partly, as I've mentioned, it is the richest part of the country. It's the most productive agriculturally. Those two things go hand in hand. It also was strategically important, particularly from the time of the Third Intermediate period onwards, well, really earlier, from the 19th dynasty, in fact, onwards, because Egypt's focus in terms of international relations was so much on the territory up to the north and east, the Levant. That's the reason why in the 19th dynasty, although Manetho was not aware of this, the capital city was moved by Ramesses II at the latest to Per-Ramesses up in the northeastern delta. It was partly that the 19th dynasty kings' family origins were here, but also it allowed them easy access to the territory they wanted to control up in the Levant. And of course, for example, by the time of Alexander the Great, Egypt is part of a wider Mediterranean empire, and so it was very important for him to establish a capital city on the Mediterranean coast. Hence the inauguration of Alexandria as a new capital city. But in fact, you could argue that the same was true for earlier lines of kings, particularly the Persians, who themselves were coming from the north and east. The Kushites, whose interest in Egypt was probably in controlling resources in the north and east. And it seems that the Libyans, who so heavily influenced the politics from the end of the New Kingdom onwards, settled principally in the Delta, again, perhaps because they were driven to Egypt in the first place by the need for stable supplies of food, which were unavailable to them anymore in their homeland to the west of Egypt, and so why not go to the most productive part of Egypt, the Delta? So that would be the reason why all these pins are in the map up there. Meanwhile, there are a few important centres along the Nile Valley, Memphis and Thebes probably being the most important of those, but one or two other places too. So there's a slightly closer look at some of those delta cities. So this is Memphis, of course, down at the balance of the two lands, the junction of the main branch of the river in the Nile Valley, and then all the other branches that lead off into the delta. The sort of twin third intermediate period capitals at Bubastis and Tanis are in the east. This is Bubastis here. This is Tanis up here. Tanis is probably an evolution from earlier cities of Avaris, which is this one, and Per-Ramesses, which is more or less right next to it. There's no pin here actually in this map, but it's right there too. Saïs is off in the western delta. Alexandria right up here on the coast in the northwest. This is Zois of the 14th dynasty. Mendes is this one here, and Sebennytos is, which is where Manetho himself came from, is right slap bang in the middle there. So we'll take these cities in chronological sequence. So let's take a look first of all at Manetho's capital of the first two dynasties, This or Thinis. We don't even know for sure which of those is more appropriate, but they both crop up in texts here and there. This place appears to have been called either Teni or Chen. You see those two variants in the hieroglyphs here. So clearly this is what inspired the later Greek form This or Thinis. It was the capital of the 8th Upper Egyptian nome. And we've already seen this quote, I think. According to Manetho, the first royal house numbers 8 kings, the first of whom, Menes of this, ruled for 62 years. He was carried off by a hippopotamus and perished. That second part isn't really relevant to our missing cities story, but it's funny, so I thought I'd keep it in. And the second dynasty, as we've seen, consists of 9 kings of this. Is it a missing city? Yes, it absolutely is, because we don't know where it was. In fact, Manetho, as so often with these obscure aspects of Egyptian history, is our main reason for thinking that the capital of those early dynasties was here. It may, in fact, you'll remember that Manetho has the capital moved to Memphis by the beginning of the third dynasty. It may, in fact, have moved to Memphis before that. You might remember that the second king of Manetho's first dynasty line is said to have built a palace in Memphis, and in fact that may have been the point at which the transition begins to be made. You will also know, I'm sure, that exactly why Manetho starts his history at the point he does, what events meant that this was such an auspicious moment in Egyptian history are still somewhat obscure to us, but we understand this to have been the point at which Egypt comes to be unified for the first time. And although we can't prove this beyond doubt, it seems likely that prior to unification there were competing, perhaps rival groups strung out along the Nile Valley, which were eventually unified by one means or another under the rule of a single individual from a particular group. And it seems likely that particular group originates in This. The move to Memphis would seem to make sense, because This, even if it's where they came from in the first place, isn't in a terribly good location strategically, certainly not as good as Memphis. So the move makes sense, and in fact it wouldn't be a massive surprise if it happened earlier than Manetho thought it did. Another reason, though, for thinking that This was the early capital is, I hope we can avoid circularity of argument here, is the Nama palette. You'll know this palette. It's a grey-whack ceremonial slate palette discovered right at the end of the 19th century by Quibell and Co. at Hermopolis within the main cultic enclosure at the site there. And it depicts clearly a king who is named as Narmer in the Serech in between the two bull's heads, right at the top of the palette here. And Narmer it is we see in a very traditional, or what would become a very traditional pharaonic pose, raising a mace above his head in his right hand, wearing the white crown and holding a vanquished enemy by the hair with his left hand. And of course, he's about to bring down this mace onto his enemy's head. Elsewhere in the decoration on the palette, we see what we know from later iconography to be the symbol of a conquered, a foreign town. So that also would seem to speak to this idea that this commemorates that victory. We can't know whether this is a depiction of genuine historical events, or it's just a reflection of something which by this point the king was supposed to do. So in the same way that it becomes obligatory, if you like, for kings in the New Kingdom not only to be seen to be doing this kind of conquering, and then to have themselves depicted doing this kind of conquering on temple walls, we can't know for sure to what extent those images always reflect genuine historical events, or whether they are just, you know, a part of the role of pharaoh symbolically. In any case, though, it does seem as though something like this probably did happen at some point in history around this this time. The name Narmer is a little bit tricky for us, in that it doesn't appear in Manetho's list. His first king, his first dynasty, is Menes. The first king in other king lists, think of the king list in the Senti temple at Abydos, for example, is also the name of a king, Men. So who is this Narmer? We can't really be sure. But a tomb of which we can apparently associate with an individual of this name crops up at Abydos, and specifically in the early dynastic cemetery at Abydos, which is this part of the site, up in the sort of ideal west. It's actually more like the sort of southern part of the site. This is the part of the site we refer to as Ga'ab, which is an Arabic phrase meaning mother of pots, given to the site because it's absolutely covered in sherds of pottery, which are the result of loads and loads and loads of visits from pilgrims making offerings of various kinds, involving ceramic vessels, which have subsequently come to be broken and are now just lying all over the place. Underneath those mounds, or in and around those mounds, Emile Amelino and subsequently Flinders Petrie investigated a series of high status burials, and which turned out to be the tombs, in fact, of the early dynastic kings who are equated to the individuals listed in Manetho's first and second dynasties. And one of those is a tomb that we now identify as being that of Narmer, which you can see up here. It's got an interesting sort of double chamber arrangement, which you see in the photograph on the right hand side here. So the tombs that show up in red, incidentally, are the main tombs, and as you can see, there's a name of a series of first dynasty kings here. Per-Ramesses, Ka-Aha, Irihor, Semerjet, Ka-Ar, Den, Jet, Merinate, and so on. Merinate is a queen, of course. And then around them we have subsidiary burials of probably of courtiers. So this would appear to be the cemetery not only of the kings. We also know that this was the capital of the same nome that Abydos is located within. And therefore, it seems likely that Abydos was the cemetery of the city of This. So This must be nearby, we think. We just don't know where. The main candidate seems to be the nearby settlement of Girga, modern settlement of Girga, which was probably overlies much older remains. So it's within the same nome. It's not a million miles away from Abydos, which is in just at the bottom of the map here. This is the pin at Girga. There is there is Girga up here. This is Abydos down here at the desert edge. There is a settlement, incidentally, at Abydos. You might remember if I skip back. The Osiris temple enclosure, the main Osiris temple enclosure, is in the area of the site we refer to as Kom el Sultan. A Kom is another word for mound, like Tel. So this could just as easily be Tel El or Tel Es Sultan, but it's Kom Es Sultan. So this is a mound, and in fact, it's a settlement mound. So there was an ancient settlement at Abydos, probably not substantial enough to have been the city of This, but I suppose it is another candidate. So This is clearly an important place. There isn't really a huge amount to say about it. The main things are that, of course, Manetho associates it with the first and second dynasties, and then the presence of the royal cemetery at Abydos within the same name would seem to suggest it must be nearby somewhere, but it has never been found. The capital then moves to Memphis, which was, as we've seen, the capital city of the first Lower Egyptian nome. As we've already seen, Manetho has a king named Atothis, which doesn't line up very nicely with any of the names we have from the archaeology of the first dynasty kings, but anyway. He was apparently Meni's son and ruled for 57 years, and it is he, as we've seen, who built a palace at Memphis. It was then subsequently the capital of Egypt of the third, fourth, probably also fifth, sixth dynasties of the Old Kingdom, and then the seventh and eighth of the first intermediate period. And even if it wasn't the capital city at all periods, it remained a very, very sizable and important city throughout. The fact that it was large population, fortified, which is always useful. People gravitate to fortified settlements, particularly at times of trouble and times when invasions are happening, as was the case from time to time in Egypt. It was also the location of one of the three major cult temples in Egypt: the Temple of Ptah, the creator god. The others being the temple of the sun god Ra at Heliopolis and the temple of Ammon at Karnak. So for lots of reasons, Memphis, whether it was the capital or not, remained a very important place. And of course, by extension, it's an incredibly important place for the whole of ancient Egypt. We've seen that one of its names was Ineb-Hej or Inebu-Heju, the White Walls. It was also sometimes referred to as Itj-tawy, the life, or I've seen it translated as the two lands are held together, or something like that. It was also it also came to be known by the name Pepi-Mennefer, which originally was the name of the pyramid of the 6th dynasty king Pepi I. And that's the name in hieroglyphs there. So the name in the cartouche is that of Pepi I. You then see the symbols for Mennefer, and the final symbol at the right-hand end is a determinative sign, a pyramid determinative, showing that this is the name of a pyramid. So, and pyramids had names, of course, and so the pyramid of Khufu at Giza was called the Horizon of Khufu. This one is called Pepi is enduring and beautiful, or something like that. Pepi-Mennefer. That came to be shortened to Mennefer, just Mennefer, which came to be known as the name of the whole city. So the city came to be known as Mennefer, and that name endured for a very long time, down to the point at which the Egyptian language had morphed into what we now refer to as Coptic, and in Coptic its name was Manfei or Menfei, which is of course a corruption of Mennefer, and the Greeks heard and understood this as Memphis, and that is how we get the present day name. So it derives from the name of the pyramid of Pepi I originally. Interestingly enough, interesting because although we kind of know where Memphis was, we don't know where it was at all times. That might sound like an odd thing to say, but I'll explain myself in just a bit. The Memphis that we think of today, which is in the area of the modern village of Mitrahina, which is shown on the map on the right-hand side here, in the red circle, is in fact particularly close to the pyramid of Pepi I, which is in the red circle to the left there. This cluster of pyramids is at the part of Saqqara we call South Saqqara, actually some way detached from the main part where you find the step pyramid and so on and so forth. And in fact, although you don't get the sense of it from this map, the desert is at a significantly higher elevation than the Nile Valley at this point. So if you visit the pyramid of Pepi I and you walk to sort of the edge of the escarpment here, you get great views down onto the Nile Valley. And if you think the other way around, the pyramid of Pepi I would have been very visible from the city, and so that's perhaps why its name came to be regarded as the name for the whole of the city. More etymology here. Forgive me if this is something I've talked about before. I think it probably is. The name, or the word Egypt, the name that we give the country, not the name that the Egyptians these days themselves use, but it's the name we give to the country, comes to us from Middle French Egypte, which ultimately comes from the earlier Latin Aegyptus and Greek Aegyptos, and those are themselves, in fact, a corruption of the earlier Egyptian Hut-Kab-Ptah, or Hikupta in a kind of later form of it. Hut-Kab-Ptah meaning the Ka house, the spirit house, temple of Ptah. So the name of the Ptah temple in the center of the city of Memphis eventually gives us that word Egypt. I think that's a nice little story. So is Memphis missing or not? Well, as I say, in some senses yes, and in some senses no. As we'll see, phases of the city are apparently lost to us at present. But when I was thinking about this, I was also thinking about how at least for some of the earliest Egyptologists, a lot of these very famous places did seem to be lost, in that they knew to some extent how grand these places must have been from writers like Strabo and Herodotus and others, and were quite disappointed when they arrived in Egypt and found that these places actually were not much more than little piles of stones here and there. And Memphis was one of these places that disappointed early travelers. The cemeteries associated with Memphis, Giza and Saqqara and Abu Sir and so on, of course, were very impressive. But of the city itself, which Strabo and others describe as being very grand, with an enormous temple, a cult of Apis at the center of it, etc., were almost nowhere to be seen. They were left a little bit sort of shocked by this. One of the first of these travelers is a man called George Sands, who on his map of Egypt describes Memphis as being destroyed. And he says in his narrative, the very ruins now are almost ruinated, yet some few impressions are left. Statues of monstrous resemblances are a scarce sufficient testimony to shew unto the curious seeker that there it had been. The location of it, incidentally, was fixed and more or less secure from pretty early on, not on the basis of the remains, but on the basis of Strabo's descriptions. Richard Pocock recalled in his visit in the later 18th century, there are two distances mentioned by Strabo in order to fix the situation of Memphis. He said it was about 11 miles from the delta and 5 from the height on which the pyramids were built, which appear to be the pyramids of Giza. Strabo speaks also of Memphis as near Babylon, so that it probably was situated on the Nile, about the middle between the pyramids of Giza and Saqqara. So I conjecture this city was around Mokhannon and Mitraheni, which we now know as Mitrahina, which are in the road from Cairo to Fayum on the west side of the Nile, and rather nearer to the pyramids of Saqqara than those of Giza. For at Mokhannon I saw some heaps of rubbish, but much greater about Mitraheni. So although we're talking about heaps of rubbish here, the heaps were more substantial at Mitrahina, and indeed it is Mitrahina that we believe is the spot of Memphis of the New Kingdom, at least, and later. Here it is on the satellite map. So again, thinking about how we read these maps, obviously green squares, fields, the sort of grey-brown areas are modern buildings mostly. The muddier areas are usually protected archaeological sites, and there's quite a large one here in the center of Mitrahina. The pins here in this map represent the more substantial standing remains, identifiable standing remains of the ancient city. And I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see this, but so what you're looking at, the splodge in the middle here, is a mixture of unencumbered, muddy, protected archaeological site, the modern village, modern buildings, which are overlying much of the archaeology. So this is this map comes from Porter and Moss, and you get a sense of the approximate lie of the land. There are two main enclosures here. A northern enclosure, which includes the 26th dynasty palace of the pharaoh Apries, and then the main enclosure of Ptah, which is the one at the bottom, this roughly square enclosure here. And as you can see, the pins in the map cluster around that area. So those are the most identifiable parts of the enclosure, and the main temple of Ptah is over here, and then these letters here represent various different smaller buildings or remains thereof that have survived in the archaeology to the extent that they can be identified. So as you can see, the modern village is very much overlying much of the Ptah temple enclosure and the northern enclosure as well. So undoubtedly, much of the archaeology of the city that we might like to investigate is now underneath this modern village. But of course, parts of the more monumental buildings within the city have survived, including one, well, in fact, more than one. Of a series of absolutely enormous statues of Ramesses II, which would have stood at the front of the Temple of Ptah, the main Temple of Ptah, including this one, which very famously was excavated by Caviglia in 1821, I think it was. It was at one point promised to Britain and was destined for the British Museum, but it turned out just to be too big to move. So it was eventually, I think it had to be rolled over onto its back. I think it was found face down, if I remember rightly. But moved not really very far at all, and then this purpose-built museum built around it so that people can look at it, and it is a very, very splendid statue indeed. Another one of these, which would have lined up in front of the Temple of Ptah, was discovered by Joseph Hekekian in the middle of the 19th century and was removed from the site and taken into the center of Cairo. It stood in Ramesses Square, which of course took its name from the king, just outside the entranceway to the main railway station in the center of Cairo. But it was moved, when would this have been? About 2011, I think. Somebody will correct me if I've got that wrong. To the entrance of the new Grand Egyptian Museum. It then stood in a metal frame for several years, but it's now been put into position in the atrium, the entrance hall of the Grand Egyptian Museum. So this one has had quite an interesting journey, going from the Temple of Ptah at Memphis to the center of Cairo and back out again to Giza, where it's now standing. It would have come from here. This is the only photograph I've got in my collection, not taken by me, but one of my pals from the University of Birmingham. This was taken in 1998 on a Birmingham study tour. And in fact, my friend probably shouldn't have been taking this photograph, which is why the guide who's showing us around is about to come running over and tell him to stop. That's probably why I don't have any photos. As you can see, it is a ruined field in the middle of the village, surrounded by date palm trees and modern apartment buildings. And as far as I'm aware, it's more or less in exactly the same condition now. I have made attempts to go and see it in modern times, but it's quite a sensitive area with lots of tourists visiting the open air museum. I'm rubbing up against the locals who just want to be left to get on with their lives. I'm hoping to be able to go at some point in the future, but anyway, for now, you get a sense of what the temple is like. It is essentially a pile of stones, mostly of the time of Ramesses II, incidentally. This is a reconstruction by Frank Monnier, brilliant French Egyptologist and architect, of what the exterior of the temple would have looked like. So this is where those statues would have come from, and this is the monumental gateway, which is right in the area of the photo I just showed you. And this is the enclosure wall that would have surrounded this the temple area here. So you get a sense of how grand it would have been. Those statues, certainly enormous statues, speak to the enclosure having been very grand. This is another reconstruction by another brilliant Frenchman, Jean-Claude Gaulvin. I often use these images. This is from his website, which is just an unbeatable resource, jeanclaudegaulvin.com. Sorry, I noticed that the M of com is just hiding behind my image here in the slide on your screens. This is a reconstruction of Memphis sometime later than the time of Ramesses the second, in the 4th century BC. So we would be right at the end of dynastic history, around the time of Alexander the Great. Of course, Memphis was one of the places, one of the fairly few places Alexander himself visited in Egypt, and it's here that Egyptian religion and the grandeur of the Temple of Ptah and the cult of Apis and so on left such a very great impression on him. You might also remember that part of the story of the burial of Alexander the Great is that his body was in fact transported from Babylon, where he died, by Ptolemy, later Ptolemy the first pharaoh of that line, to Memphis. Most probably in part because Memphis, being large and fortified, allowed Ptolemy to protect himself against the pursuing rivals of his who also wanted to carry the body off and bury it somewhere else. There's a lot of conjecture involved in this, but in any case, you get a sense of a city with a large temple enclosure at its center on the banks of the Nile, with the desert cemeteries up off to the west. More statues from more images, sorry, from the 1998 study tour. This is a temple, small temple of Hathor, as you'll notice from the Hathor column capitals on the right hand side, and another smaller temple of Ramesses II, which is right close to the very close to the open air, the modern day open air museum on the left hand side. All these things are sadly out of bounds at the moment. The Ministry of Antiquities and the Ancient Egypt Research Associates, which is Mark Lehner's what would you call it, NGO for excavating and archaeological research, put together a walking trail about 10 years or so ago. The idea being that visitors to the site could visit the open air museum where the colossal statue of Ramesses II is, but then they would be guided around, self-guided, on a walk around these various different places, and unfortunately it never survived. So again, I think it's to do with the locals preferring that tourists don't go tramping around their roads and fields and houses. But it's a shame, because although there's not very much to see relative to what there was, of course, at Memphis, there is rather more to see than you would know just from visiting the open air museum. So you get a bit of a sense of that from these photographs, at least. So is Memphis missing? Well, as I say, to the early travelers, yeah, I guess it sort of was, in that they were expecting to see the full glory of a Temple of Ptah and a major city, and found just sort of piles of stones here and there and some half-buried statues, and quite possibly some annoyed locals. So it was sort of missing to them. We now do know where at least New Kingdom and later Memphis was. However, earlier Memphis, early dynastic Memphis, so the phase of the city at the point at which it was probably first established as the capital of a unified Egypt, is elusive. So quite aside from the early travellers' visits to the site, which revealed these colossal statues, Caviglia excavated the one that's in the open air museum, Hekekian the one that's now in the gem, etc. The site was excavated by Flinders Petrie, subsequently by a University of Pennsylvania mission, I think under his name escapes me now, I'm very sorry, Clarence Fisher. It's also been the focus of the Egypt Exploration Society's survey of Memphis from the sort of late 70s and early 80s onwards. This was an extension ultimately of Brian Emery's Saqqara work. And the survey not only was a modern topographic survey of the whole of the area, the ancient city and the cemetery at Saqqara as well. But they also did some text excavations in specific points in and around Mitrahina to try and establish a kind of keyhole surgery way of doing things, but to try and establish what layers were present. And they were able to identify certainly Middle Kingdom Memphis, New Kingdom Memphis, later Memphis. I'm not sure about Old Kingdom Memphis, but certainly early dynastic Memphis not, which is a bit of a mystery. You know, it wasn't in the same spot. It didn't seem to be present. So where is it? Where was it? Was Manetho right? Well, probably he was. And ultimately, the survey of Memphis came to the conclusion that the likelihood is, the reason that they weren't able to find it is that it had moved, and this is to do with the movement of the river. So this, I'm sorry, rather complicated set of drawings is taken from Judith Bunbury's article, Geomorphological Development of the Memphite Floodplain over the Past 6,000 Years. Judith Bunbury is a Cambridge geologist, earth scientist, who was approached by David Jeffries, Dr. David Jeffries, the director of the Survey of Memphis, to work with the EES team to try to establish the way the natural environment had changed during the period that Memphis was occupied in ancient Egypt. And this showed very strikingly that the river had moved very substantially. So if you look at the way they conclude here, the settlements show up as these sort of grey blobs here and here and here. If you look at in the early dynastic, the settlement they think is perhaps right up at the western extent of the Nile Valley. This is the desert here, and you'll remember there's quite a significant shift in elevation from the Nile Valley here up onto the desert. So this is almost, you can almost imagine sort of cliffs here. So the city at that time was right at the base of those cliffs with the river running right by it. But the river then begins to move eastwards over time, and that seems to have had the effect of shifting the location of the settlement eastwards as well, so that by the time of even by the time of the Old Kingdom, it's already moved away from the sort of edge of the cliffs, if you like, further into the center of the Nile Valley, and it's in roughly that spot that it remains. It may well be that the EES team were looking in the wrong place for early dynastic Memphis. Unfortunately, that spot there where they believe the settlement may be is now occupied by the road and the Imhotep Museum and the administrative buildings of the Ministry of Antiquities that are right at the bottom of the cliffs at Saqqara. So just at the moment, they began to realize that that's probably the place to look for early dynastic Memphis. A whole load of new buildings were built in that spot, and so that's prevented them from ever finding it. So Memphis, at least in the early dynastic, is still missing. I mentioned that in the Middle Kingdom, although Manetho claims that the 11th and 12th dynasties reigned from Thebes, we should add into there Itj-tawy. You might remember that from my talk on the Fayum, that this is the period, the 12th dynasty, when the Fayum expands enormously, and this seems to have been the point at the beginning of the 12th dynasty, when perhaps following an unsuccessful assassination attempt on the first king of the reign, Amenemhat I, there's this move to a city which, to give it its full name, is called Amenemhat Itj-tawy. Amenemhat takes possession of the two lands, which was just abbreviated to Itj-tawy. And it, again, just as the kings of Thinis or This of the first dynasty may have felt that This was not in a very suitable position strategically, too far distant from the north, they decided to move further north to be closer to the balance of the two lands. The 12th dynasty kings, who were based at Thebes, even further south than This, would perhaps have felt the same need to be closer to the action, closer to the north. And so they make this jump to a site which we think was in the region of the Fayum, but which in fact is another of our missing cities. We do not know exactly where it was. We know of its existence from texts. We also know that Amenemhat himself and his successor, his immediate successor, Senusret I, were both buried at the site of Lisht, which is up here, in the Nile Valley, but not very far away from the Fayum, which is the region that they were developing. We also, of course, know that in succeeding reigns, Senusret II built a pyramid here at Lahoun along the edge of this channel, which connects the Nile to the Fayum itself. And then Amenemhat III, the greatest of the builders of the Middle Kingdom, had his pyramid and burial at, well, a pyramid. He has another one at Dashur. At Hawara here, quite close to what became Crocodilopolis. It was now modern-day Fayum city, originally Shedet. So Itj-tawy is most probably somewhere around here. We deduce on the basis of the fact that the royal cemetery moves from where it had been in Thebes, where the family originated and was based in the 11th dynasty. Probably Itj-tawy is somewhere further north. We're not a million miles away from Memphis here, so to this approximately the same location as Memphis, which is, as we've seen, strategically very well located. Itj-tawy was probably somewhere around here as well, but we can't say for sure. So this is certainly one of our missing cities. And just to illustrate that point, if you like, Memphis is right up at the top here. Thebes, the origin of the origins of the 11th dynasty kings are down here. The origins of the 12th dynasty kings, they are moving much further north to be close to this region that they are developing in the Fayum, and that bit closer to the previously established capital of Memphis. And of course, that name even sort of hints at that. Amenemhat is the unifier of the two lands. This was perhaps their attempt to confirm their control of this territory, which had previously been in the hands of the kings at Heracleopolis, which is also in the region of the Fayum. And that's the Heracleopolitan kings who were the rivals to the Theban line of the 11th and 12th dynasties in the preceding First Intermediate period. I hope that makes sense. I was getting a bit confused. So Thebes itself is the place of origin of the 11th dynasty kings. Known as Waset in ancient times, Thebes is one of these much later Greek names, as we've seen, also referred to in Greek times as Diospolis, which is the name Manetho gives to it. It was the capital of the fourth Upper Egyptian nome, the capital city of Egypt, according to Manetho, in the 11th, 12th, and 13th dynasties of the Middle Kingdom. Although we would argue now that he's right for the 11th, but not for the 12th and 13th, when probably those kings were at Itj-tawy. He also has it as the capital of the 18th, 19th, and 20th. These days, I think people would mostly say that the capital of the New Kingdom was in fact at Memphis, but the religious capital of Egypt, of the New Kingdom, was certainly Thebes. Ammon, whose cult center is in Thebes at Karnak, having become the most important god in the country at this point. And of course, the royal cemetery of the 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties, the New Kingdom, is in Thebes as well, across the river from the city in the Valley of the Kings. So it certainly was a very important place in these times. And of course, again, just as Memphis was important as a large settlement and the cult center of the god Ptah, with a great big temple there, Thebes was also always going to be important because of the presence of the cult center of Ammon at Karnak, even if politics meant that the political geography shifted and the capital shifted. Ammon's religious importance would remain throughout. So Thebes, in fact, is missing in a sense the major surviving remains of the city on the east side. Of course, on the west side of the river, we have the very, very rich and extensive cemeteries, not only of the Valley of the Kings, but of the elite officials of the Middle Kingdom, the New Kingdom, and subsequent periods, all around about, or closer to the Nile Valley in the low foothills, the low Theban foothills. On the east side of the river is where we would expect to find the city, and this is where we find two of the most important temples in the country. The major cult center of Ammon is at Karnak, off in the north, in the far distance here in Jean-Claude Golvin's reconstruction. And in the south, a temple referred to as the Southern Harem. So even in the name, connected to the to the most excellent of places, Karnak in the north, is the Temple of Luxor, which goes back at least as far as the time of Thutmose III, possibly Hatshepsut, although the earliest, most substantial parts of the building date to the time of Amenhotep III. The temple is then later physically connected, having been sort of symbolically connected from its inception. It was physically connected to Karnak by an avenue of sphinxes, or at least a processional route, in the time of Ramesses II in the 19th dynasty. We assume that the city of Thebes was in and around this area. It is, however, missing in the sense that we haven't recovered it archaeologically. We've got no houses or other buildings relating to the city. So in that sense, we can't say exactly where it was. This is another of Golvan's reconstruction. So in this case, we're looking westwards across the river towards the New Kingdom funerary temples and the Gurn, the great Theban mountain, in the distance, with the temples of Luxor at left and Karnak bottom right here, with the city sort of shown as being in between. But this is, as I say, this is sort of conjecture. There's no reason to think that's not right, but it's not provable archaeologically at the moment. And indeed, of course, modern day Luxor, which, although it wasn't a very substantial settlement until archaeology and tourism arrived a century or so ago, is now a substantial settlement of a million or so people. Most probably the ancient city is underneath, if it survives at all, it's underneath modern Luxor. But there's an interesting point, I think, to make here about how actually some of that ancient city might have been findable more recently than we might like to think. So if you think of the Mosque of Abu al-Hajjaj, which is within the ancient temple here, it's built within the courtyard, or the first court, just behind the first pylon, which is an extension of the temple executed under Ramesses II. That mosque, of course, is sitting at a higher elevation than the ancient floor level, and that's because it was built on the accumulation of layers of debris relating to human activity and occupation over the centuries since the original construction of the first court. That's why it's sitting at this high level. And up until not that long ago, that accumulation debris was present throughout the temple. So this photograph at the top right here was taken by Antonio Beato. I don't know absolutely when, but this area of the temple was cleared, I think, around the sort of 1870s. So this would have been taken before that time, when the temple itself, within and around it, was encumbered by accumulation debris, layers and layers and layers of archaeological material relating to centuries of occupation. And then on the top of that, the latest phase in that occupation, the buildings of modern 19th century Luxor. So this is the colonnade of Tutankhamun and Horemheb, and you can only really sort of see the top half of these columns. In the bottom left-hand corner here, you can see the temple as it is today, having been cleared of debris down to the ancient floor. And you can see in between columns here a nice little staircase leading up into a building here. I think I would be right in saying that this is the home of the local consul, who acted on behalf of visitors from several countries, including Britain, who was the sort of first person you'd go and visit if you were doing the grand tour in Egypt. So Amelia Edwards and co, for example, paid a visit to this guy. I don't remember his name at the moment, I'm sorry. Anyway, I digress. The important point here is that up until the 19th century, until roughly the 1870s, when the temple was cleared in order to reveal the ancient structure in all its glory, the accumulation layers were still there, and it's very possible, well, it's certain that there will have been lots of very valuable archaeology in there, which was just tossed aside. It's very unlikely that the ancient city of Thebes, of course, any evidence for the ancient city would have been present within the temple area, but around and about, you can imagine there might well have been accumulation that has also been done away with as a part of the development of the modern city. You get more of a sense. I was just really an excuse to show more of these amazing photos. This is the first pylon on the left-hand side in a photograph by Francis Frith, who was working in Egypt in the 1850s. So you can see the statues outside the first pylon here, buried almost up to the shoulders. And if you look sort of in between the two towers of the first pylon, you can see the mosque of Abu al-Hajjaj, the minaret, but also perhaps just little bits of other buildings poking out within. So an enormous amount was lost here, and no doubt at other sites, when they were cleared in order that people could see the ancient temples in their full glory. There was a tiny little bit of the ancient town mound still surviving. If you know your Luxor, if you think of the way the road, the corniche, runs along the west side of the temple, so actually the photograph on the left-hand side here, on the front cover of Aerogram, was taken from probably just off the corniche, just inside the temple area. You may remember, if you visited Luxor before about 2009, that there used to be some very, very grand century or so old villas just in that area, on the temple side of the corniche, and their presence had stopped a part of the temple area from being completely cleared, and there was a little section of the town mound still remaining. Those were demolished, tragically, around about 2009. I think one of them then survived for a little bit longer, and they're all gone now. And so ERA, again, Mark Lehner's team, was brought in to archaeologically excavate the last bit of this town mound. And here it is. The excavations were done in one season, but they were able to reveal 2,000 years worth, going back to Roman times, not earlier, but going back to Roman times, 2,000 years worth of occupation. And they established, for example, a ceramic sequence going back all the way through that 2,000 years, which is something that's very rare for Upper Egypt. So in this way, you know, Thebes isn't really missing. We know where it must have been, but we don't have it archaeologically. And these old photographs and then this excavation of the last part of the town mound just give you a sense that there would have been probably something there to rescue, but it's disappeared. We do know, of course, about a lost city in the Theban region, which is this so-called lost golden city that was announced to have been discovered in I think it was 2021, which was found in the region of the Birket Habu, this great, absolutely immense harbour of Amenhotep III, which is a part of the wider Amenhotep III landscape that includes Malkata, his settlement, small but city-sized sort of settlement, and his mortuary temple, which is over at the sort of topish right in the image here. The Birket Habu, by the way, the harbour shows up, as you can see, as this roughly square shape in the satellite images. His city, Malkata, is kind of behind here, and the excavations that revealed the lost golden city were carried out in this area here. So this is the harbour, this is the city as we knew about it. These are some of the mortuary temples of the time. This is the mortuary temple of Amenhotep III. So the excavations that revealed this new city were there, and in fact, as these posts from Vicky Jensen, which I found on Facebook actually, but they're very, very well done, using satellite images and plans from excavation reports of Alexander Varis and Georges Robichon, show that actually what was found, this lost golden city, is almost certainly just one of the outlying parts of the wider Malkata settlement. So very exciting and very, I mean, amazing to see these still standing walls of buildings. So we've talked a lot about missing cities, but this is what a city or a settlement, substantial settlement, would have looked like if we were able to go and excavate places like Memphis or Thebes across the other side of the river. If they survive, this is the sort of thing we might expect to see of a ruined archaeological city. But this is not Thebes itself. It's a sort of satellite part of it, I suppose. Malkata and all those buildings are part of a grander city design of Amenhotep III's. If you remember my lecture on Amenhotep and Akhenaten, I talked about the similarity between Amenhotep's kind of city-wide planning, and all the yellow pins here represent constructions of Amenhotep III at strategic points either side of the River Nile, in Thebes and across the water on the west side and the cemetery side. And this also recalls something which happens just a little while after the time of Amenhotep III, when Akhenaten established his city at Amarna. And that city, of course, is not now missing, but it certainly was, in the sense that it was completely unknown, and of course the whole story of Akhenaten and Akhet-Aten, his capital city, completely unknown until the 19th century. Early travellers, including Claude Sicard, had visited the area and to some extent documented the monument. So this is his rather charmingly inaccurate drawing of a boundary stealer, showing a sort of slightly funny take on a sun disk with Akhenaten and Nefertiti shown below, and an assortment of hieroglyphs arranged around about. So Sicard noticed there was something interesting at Amarna, but didn't really understand it. It wasn't until the Egyptologist, much better informed Egyptologist, a little while later, John Gardner Wilkinson, visited Amarna and was taken to the tombs, the elite tombs, that he recognized that the iconography of this place and of this period was quite different from traditional Egyptian iconography, and that there was something very odd going on. And he wasn't the first to document the city, but this is his plan of the remains in the city. He and others, including Robert Hay, began making documentation of what they found in the tombs, and it is this that eventually leads to the recognition of the whole story of Akhenaten, and the fact that he had been ultimately, we realized, deliberately forgotten, his city abandoned as well, but that there was at a certain point a very substantial, indeed complete capital city at the site, which of course we now know had been built in very short order and then subsequently abandoned, which is partly why it was forgotten. Of course, it's also at Amarna that we have this incredible story of the planning of the city. Akhenaten tells us in these boundary stelae. This is the very one that Sicard had copied, everything that he intended to do, and then the archaeology reflects all of that with the buildings of state, temples, archives, workshops, and etc., and then houses for the population of all classes, from the very wealthiest, the top of society, the royal family, right down to the ordinary working people. And some of those buildings are aligned, and that tallies with what we see at Thebes under Amenhotep III as well. And of course, the archaeology has revealed a great deal, and continues to reveal a great deal of the site as well. So not missing now, but it certainly was. And here's another of Golvan's reconstructions. Well, another of the great sort of stories of missing city or cities that has now been concluded, I think, unless anybody wants to argue more about it, really involves telling the story of three cities at once: Avaris, Per-Ramesses, and Tanis. And Tanis of these is the one that I'm going to take in the most detail here. This was the capital of the 19th Lower Egyptian nome, right up at the northeastern extent of the delta, almost at the point of the frontier with the foreign territory of the Levant. The capital of Manetho's Dynasty 21, also Dynasty 23. 21 is an important moment in Egyptian history, of course, because this is the point at which the country is split into two that split being one of the defining features of the whole of the Third Intermediate period. So Tanis is, if it is indeed the capital of the 21st dynasty kings, was the capital of the north of Egypt at this time, while Thebes in the south became the capital of Upper Egypt, not with a king, but a chief priest at its head, the chief priest of Ammon, based at the temple of Karnak. The temple, which is at the center of Tanis, the Ammon temple, is in fact a sort of northern counterpart to the southern cult center of Ammon at Karnak. So each of the two divided halves of the country now come to have their own Ammon temple. You've probably seen this slide a million times before. It's my attempt to reconstruct the history of the 21st dynasty, with the 21st dynasty kings line shown on the left-hand side and the concurrent line of priests on the right-hand side. The temple at Tanis, this northern cult center of Ammon, is largely, or was constructed, of blocks bearing the name of Ramesses II, which initially fooled archaeologists into thinking that Tanis was probably the 19th dynasty capital of Per-Ramesses, which we knew from evidence elsewhere was the capital city inaugurated under Ramesses II, or thereabouts. In fact, however, we now understand that the reason that Ramesses' name appears in so many of the blocks used to construct the temple at Tanis is that they were originally a part of the temple of Ammon at Per-Ramesses, but were subsequently moved from wherever that was, we'll see where it was in a second, to Tanis under the 21st dynasty kings. Per-Ramesses had in fact been some 30 kilometers to the south at the site we now know as Cantia, which in fact was very close to the earlier capital city of Avaris. And this map shows this quite nicely. So we're at the northeastern delta here. You can just about see the Mediterranean up at the top right of the slide, and the sandy nothingness of the Sinai Peninsula at the right-hand side. So you can see Avaris and Per-Ramesses are really very close to one another here, and it's tempting to wonder actually if they are not in some ways one and the same site, or the reason for the location of both of them being so similar is similar. They were both originally on an ancient river channel, which would have come from the Memphite area, from Memphis, and heading out in this direction. Tanis, as you can see, is a little way to the north. This is about 30 kilometers to the north. It also lay on a branch of the river, and we now understand that the reason for the change, I'm not sure how well you can really see this here. This is a map from Baines and Malek's Atlas of Ancient Egypt, showing those ancient river channels, and that Avaris and Per-Ramesses were on one, but it seems that river channel dried up, or at least came to carry less water, to the extent that it wasn't viable for a major city to be situated on its banks anymore. So the city had to move, and all the temple masonry moved at the same time. So this is why Ramesses' name crops up so many times on the blocks at Tanis. It wasn't his city, but it was his temple, just moved. So this is Tanis. In fact, this is the image that we saw at the very start of the lecture in the opening slide. And as you can see, the village, the modern village of San el-Hagar, is off to the left-hand side here, but the archaeological area, which shows up as being quite muddy, is quite well preserved. The lighter coloured areas where the pin is are the temple area. That's the area that's been the focus of most excavation. Naturally, it's the building that was built of stone. It's the building that preserves the monumental stuff. The outlying areas are the city. Much of this has not been fully excavated. It has these days mostly been mapped through geophysical surveys, satellite imaging as well. It was one of the sort of more famous part of Sarah Parcak's satellite investigations a few years ago. It was said at that time that Tanis had been discovered as a result of the satellite investigations, which is absolutely not true. The earlier magnetometry had shown a lot of that, and of course we knew this was Tanis from the 19th century anyway. Not to be too sniffy about things, Sarah's work's very good, but it's not true that the satellite images enabled the discovery of the site. Anyway, so here it is with the temple area in the center here, and as I mentioned before, the brown coloration here, much of it is actually mud brick, the remains of mud brick houses and other buildings. So when you visit the site now, what you can see is this exposed temple area, which has been, it's still a ruined field. It's kind of less a ruined field these days because a lot of the obelisks, you can see, and some of the columns have been re-erected. This has happened quite recently, since the first few times I visited, certainly. So on the one hand, it gives you perhaps more of a sense of the alignment of the temple and the central axis. On the other hand, it's not quite, I have to say, quite the romantic ruin field that it once was. Incidentally, I think I would be right in saying that some of the obelisks that are in these photographs are no longer even at Tanis. The one that's now in the middle of Tahrir Square on the roundabout that was made famous during the revolution in 2011 came from here, and I think is probably one of these, not sure. There was very famously, I should have put photos of this in, sorry. There was very famously a recumbent colossal statue of Ramesses II here as well, which was photographed by Petrie and made for a very romantic sight of a fallen colossus. That has been moved as well, and it's now in the gem. It's in a bit of the gem though that nobody goes to. So weirdly, I suspect most people are not seeing it anymore. Anyway, I think that's a slightly sad story, but maybe they'll change things at the Grand Egyptian Museum, and lots more people will see it than ever saw it at Tanis. Not very many people ever go, so perhaps eventually people will see it. It's also, of course, Tanis, the site of the royal tombs of the 21st and 22nd dynasties, which would seem to confirm Manetho's suggestion that this was the capital city of that period. The 21st and 23rd dynasties, that is. In between, Manetho has the capital moved to the site of Bubastis. It's not clear, actually, whether he was right in this, but Bubastis certainly was a very sizable settlement, and there was a very significant temple there too. So, as we've seen, this is what Manetho says about it. The 22nd dynasty consisted of 9 kings of Bubastis. The site now, or at least what in terms of what archaeology is visible, is mostly a ruined temple of the cat goddess Bastet, most substantial parts of which relate to, surprise, surprise, Ramesses II, the greatest builder of them all and the greatest usurper of monuments of them all, but these are mostly a construction of his time. There's also some very substantial parts of the 22nd dynasty. Again, you would expect that, specifically the reign of Azorkon II, if indeed this was the capital city. There is actually, you may remember if you know the missing tombs story, there is the suggestion that actually there may have been royal tombs here. We are missing some of the tombs of the 22nd dynasties and thereabouts, and some shabty fragments relating to a pharaoh Sheshonq were discovered at Tel Basta a few years ago, which does sort of hint at the possibility that there might have been royal tombs in the temple area in the same equivalent spot to the royal tombs at Tanis. The temple was explored by Navil and subsequently others. There are other areas. There are some Old Kingdom tombs. There is a palace of the Old or Middle Kingdom, I think, possibly. But the city area is mostly unexplored. So unlike Tanis, which is really in the middle of a very kind of agricultural area and next to a pretty small village, I don't want to be mean and say Tanis is in the middle of nowhere, but it kind of is in the middle of nowhere. Tel Basta is right next door to a major city, the city of Zagazig, which is beginning to sort of surround it. So this is Zagazig all around here. There's a main road running through the center of the city here, and everything that's on this side of the road in this area, again showing up as a patch of ground with no or very little building on it, is the protected archaeological area of Tel Basta, Tel again being an archaeological mound, Basta getting its name, of course, from Per-Bastet, the house of Bastet, or Bubastis, the Greek, getting its name from Per-Bastet, or the place of Bubastis, the place of Bastet. So just zooming in a little, this is the temple area here, and it is a very substantial temple, a very substantial ruin field. But you can see the archaeological area is much larger. And in fact, the outlying areas around here are the remains of the ancient settlement, which have hardly, I think I'd be right in saying, hardly ever been properly investigated. So again, this is not a city that's missing in that sense. We know where it is, but it is kind of missing in the sense that, you know, we don't know it because it's never been investigated properly. This is what it looks like. Again, as you can see, in some places, some parts of the fallen masonry have been arranged in such a way as to give you a sense of some sense of the layout of the temple. But if you look at the top right, it is basically a jumble of enormous blocks of stone. People often ask when I'm at the site, you know, why don't they put it back together? Well, not an easy job to put this enormous jigsaw puzzle back when every single one of the jigsaw puzzle pieces weighs several tons. So for now, it is still a romantic ruin field, just as Tanis is. Hermopolis and Heracleopolis, I'm going to just deal with very quickly here together, because they were both cities that there was the seat of a king in the later Third Intermediate period. And we know this, or the clearest indication we have of this is the Pianki stela, the victory stela of Pi or Pianki. This Kushite king, who is one of the earliest of the 25th dynasty line, who, his stela inscription tells us, marched into Egypt from Kush in Sudan, marched up the Nile, and found that up to a certain point, the Egyptian cities were perfectly happy for him to be in charge, and indeed it seems he had already taken control of much of southern Egypt. But further north, he began to encounter resistance, and so he has to defeat a series of towns and cities on his way north, ultimately to meet his principal enemy, Tefnacht of Saïs. So Saïs is the main aggravator here, if you like, but not in fact included in what we see in the lunette of the stela. You might remember this from other talks I've given. This is P, whose figure has been defaced here, and all around about him, this is the god Ammon himself, and Mut behind him. But then either side of the central figures here, there's a whole load of characters bowing down, and the ones on the left hand side here are the chiefs of some of the towns and cities that P encounters, defeated chiefs bowing down in obeisance to their overlord. The ones on the right are all kings. The chap at the top here is Nimlot of Hermopolis. So there was a king at Hermopolis at this point. Then we have an Azorkon of Bubastis, a Yuput of Leontopolis, Tel Mokdam, and Pefchau Bast at Heracleopolis. So Bubastis we've just been to. Leontopolis is another of the delta centers. Hermopolis and Heracleopolis are approximately in the region of the Fayum in the case of Heracleopolis, and some way south into Middle Egypt in the case of Hermopolis. Here they are. So Heracleopolis, a major player in the first intermediate period, and again in the third. And Hermopolis in the region of Amarna, so separated by some distance, and yet still close enough for it to be perhaps a bit of a surprise to find that there was a king in each of these places. Hermopolis is in the center of the modern village of El Ashmunain, which in fact the modern name Ashmunain derives from the ancient name is Hemenu, which became Shmun in Coptic, and that eventually worked its way into Ashmunain. So Hermopolis actually is nothing to do with the original name of the place. Of course, that's the Greek word meaning the city of Hermes, their god. But the modern name El Ashmunain actually is a sort of survival of the ancient one. And again, we're looking at, as you can see, field boundaries all around, a modern settlement with at its heart a protected archaeological area, which we can see here. It's a very large site, actually. And this is the main temple area. It was a cult center of the god Thoth. So this is a Thoth temple, which was added to and enlarged and expanded at various points throughout dynastic history. This is Heracleopolis, which is a part of the modern village of Echinacea now. I've never been to Heracleopolis, so I'm excited that I will be going there quite soon. And this, as we've seen, was one of the capital cities of the First Intermediate Period, and also the seat of Per-Ramesses, the king at the time of Pianki. Another of these important Third Intermediate Period cities is Saïs, which, as I mentioned, is the location of the base of Pi's principal enemy at the time of his invasion, a guy called Tefnacht. And Tefnacht, although he wasn't a king, according to the P stela, seems to have, in fact, eventually become a king, declared himself a king. So although P, the stela tells us he defeated Tefnacht, actually it seems as though Tefnacht waited until the coast was clear and then quietly carried on and in fact made himself a king. He was then succeeded by a ruler called Per-Ramesses, whose name in Greek, in the Greek form, is Bocoris, and he's the only king who was known to Manetho of the 24th dynasty. So this he ruled a period just slightly after the time of Pianki, and according to Manetho, in his reign a lamb spoke. Another of those interesting nuggets of information that we can't really know what to do with, other than perhaps just laugh. But of course, a little while later, so the 24th dynasty is another one of these little sort of dynasties, along with that of Per-Ramesses at Heracleopolis, Hermopolis in Nimlot in Hermopolis, Azorkon in Bubastis, and Yupa in Leontopolis. But Saïs eventually asserts itself as the major player, and under Psamtik I comes to establish itself as the capital city of a reunified Egypt, following the expulsion of the Kushites, the invasions of the Assyrians, and the withdrawal of the Assyrians. So Saïs is a major center as well throughout the first millennium BC. Again, part of the modern village of Sar el Hagar, not to be confused with San el Hagar of Tanis. And again, so what we're looking at is field boundaries, a modern village, and then a protected archaeological area at the top. There's a bit of a sad story here. Again, Saïs, we know the approximate location of it, but again, in some sense, it is missing in that we hardly have anything of it. And this is a sad situation in that there is very, very little at Saïs now. There's substantial remains still at Heracleopolis and Hermopolis. At Saïs, not so much, but in the 19th century, it seems there was possibly quite a lot more than there is still now. So this is a sketch map made by Champollion, which quite clearly shows a linear temple enclosure with a substantial something in the middle of it. And then off to the top left of his sketch here, perhaps another kind of enclosure of some kind with labeled on it a sarcophagus. And again, thinking back to the story of the missing tombs here, we know that this was the place of burial of the kings of the 26th dynasty, as you would expect. It was their capital city. It would have been the site of a very great temple to their principal goddess, Nath. And yet none of this survives now. There are just a couple of sarcophagus fragments, some Shabti fragments of the 26th dynasty kings, which have been found here, but also elsewhere. But very, very little else. Similarly, the Lepsius expedition from a little while later than Champollion's expedition seemed to show quite substantial standing remains of one kind or another. But these days, sadly, there is really very, very little to see. So the top right is the sort of general lie of the land. The water table is quite high at Saïs, higher than it is at Heracleopolis or Hermopolis, which perhaps means that the monuments haven't survived so well. The site has been the subject of a project led by Dr. Penny Wilson of the University of Durham under the auspices of Durham and the EES since the 1990s. And Penny is in the red T-shirt here, showing an EES group around the site and standing on some very substantial stone remains. But these are the most substantial remains still in situ that you can see at the site. So there must have been a very great temple here, along with the royal necropolis. But you get very little sense of that now. So although we know the location, ancient Saïs, I think we can say, is indeed missing. I'm going to skip really, really quickly through Alexandria because I'm aware that I've already taken up probably too long. And in fact, although the font's gone a bit funny here, I have covered Alexandria in a previous talk, which is still available in the YouTube archive here, Alexandria Found and Lost. Basically, as you'll know if you remember that talk, we know really more about ancient Alexandria from descriptions than we do from archaeology. Mahmoud Bey al-Falaki, the astronomer, gives us our best map of Alexandria, along with drawings of early travelers, which together allow us to establish where certain things, the boundary wall of the city, perhaps some of the other major buildings, the major roadways through the center, might have been located. And then there's the question of whether or not the alabaster tomb, which is a part of the modern cemetery of El Latin, could be a survival of the tomb of Alexander, which again the sources tell us was here somewhere, but otherwise, if it's not this, has never turned up archaeologically. So again, we know where Alexandria was, but very much of it is still missing. Some of it inevitably underneath the waters of the ocean now as well. We can be fairly clear about that, even if underwater archaeology has revealed quite a lot of it, including monumental masonry blocks like this. The last city we're going to deal with is Antinopolis. This was not a capital city. It has a very particular sort of beginning to it, in that it was established by the Roman Emperor Hadrian. So we're right at the very end of ancient Egyptian history now, or coming towards the end of it. It was founded by Hadrian, as I think I mentioned at the start, to commemorate the death of his favourite Antinous, who we see here on the left. That's Hadrian himself on the right-hand side there. Antinous had drowned in the Nile in 130 AD, near to the spot of Antinopolis. And so Hadrian decided to build a city on the spot. And as late as the early 19th century, a great deal of that city still survived. So these are images from the Description de l'Egypte, drawings made by Napoleon's savants right at the end of the 18th century, right at the very beginning of the 19th. And as you can see, substantial mounds all over the place, with a crossroads. You can see a main street here, column-lined main street, and another one running perpendicular to it along here. And in the background, you won't be able to see it very well, but that is the remains of a hippodrome sketched in on this plan. We'll see that just a little bit better in a bit. Much of what we see in this image sadly no longer survives. There was a monumental entranceway to a theatre, which as far as I'm aware has not survived. There was a triumphal arch, still standing in the time of Napoleon's artists and scientists, no longer still standing. They sketched out this this tremendous plan, showing again that central line of two streets here with a crossroads in the center, and then this is that the outline of this hippodrome just outside the city walls here. The outline of the city actually in the satellite images is still very visible. You can just about see that here. So this is the area of the city. This is the modern village of El Sheikh Ibada, which is the other name given to the site these days. So the savants map maps quite nicely onto the satellite images here. The basic shape of the city is still very visible. And in fact, if you look closely, that is a part of that hippodrome, the shape of that hippodrome there. But as you can see, although one side of the what would be the seating of the hippodrome is still present, the other side is now being swallowed up. I think this must be a cemetery. I'm not sure about that, but still visible, at least in the satellite images. I suspect it's probably imperceptible from the ground, but again, I don't know. I've never been. I am looking forward very much to going along with some of you in the next few weeks. So that's sort of where I am with things at the moment. For those of you who are coming along on the Missing Cities trip, I'm really looking forward to seeing you all. Really looking forward to visiting these places in person, revisiting these themes in some of our talks, and no doubt in some of the conversations we're going to have. And I'm hoping that in future iterations of this this talk, and there will be future iterations, I know that already, I will be able to fill in some of these blanks. And who knows, as Chris was suggesting earlier, maybe we'll find some of these missing cities when we're out there. So to be continued in the sense that I and some of you out there are going to be going to some of these cities. Also to be continued in the next month's talk is a sort of part 2 to this. I mentioned Strabo quite a few times in this talk. His geography was very much the basis for the very beginnings of archaeology in Egypt, and it continues to inform us to a certain extent now. So I thought that for the next talk, we'd have a deep dive into Strabo's visit to Egypt, which took place, we're not exactly sure when, but in very early Roman times, not long after the deaths of Cleopatra and Mark Antony, when so many of these places were still thriving cities. So we're going to see what he says about these places and have a little look at how what he tells us compares with what we've managed to recover archaeologically and what we haven't. And you probably remember also that we're heavily reliant for Strabo and Herodotus and others for descriptions of things like the labyrinth of the Fayum, the labyrinth at Hawara, the Osirion also, which I've dealt with in talks recently. So I thought it was high time to have a look at Strabo, having covered those things and also these missing cities. The last thing to say on that is that I've had to change the date of that talk as well. So in this case, I think it's moved one day early from, if I remember rightly, from the 17th to the 16th. The other thing is that the start time is slightly earlier. I can't now do this talk on the Friday because I've got to be on a train to Glasgow to do another lecture about something I've already forgotten. And I've got something to do in the evening on the 16th. So it's going to be at, I think, 4 o'clock. But in any case, if you check the YouTube thing, the time has been adjusted on there. So I think 4 o'clock on the 16th rather than 6 o'clock on the 17th start time. With that, if any of you are still awake, alive or present, then thank you so much. Thank you as always for putting up with me and for listening. Thank you for all of your support. All of you here are Lapis level members of the channel, and I really appreciate your support and watching and keeping me going, doing all this stuff. I do really enjoy doing it, and I hope you enjoy listening. So yeah, so there we go. Thanks very much. I'll stay online for a little bit. If any of you have still got the will to live, and if you've got any questions or comments or whatever, I will do my best to answer those. So I have a few more comments from earlier, I think. A few hellos. Always nice to see you saying hello to each other in the chat. Oh, Jamie says, hi, Chris, going to keep the volume low while I watch because it's still school time here in New Jersey. Jamie is my pal from Belleville High School in New Jersey, and I got to visit the school a couple of years ago thanks to Jamie and her colleague John's hospitality. So thanks very much, Jamie, for joining during the school day. Really appreciate it. So a few more hellos. Hello from Toronto and from Iris. Amy says, do we think Zois is on the list? Well, you will have seen that, Amy. It was. Not much to see at Zois. I did have a look at the satellite images actually, but not much to see and not much to say about it. Maybe for a future version of this talk or for the book or something. There's a book. Don't think there's going to be a book, but you never know. And Amy says, how best to gauge new books than with a captive audience? Well, yeah, serious point. I've got no plans to do any books at the moment. I have, in fact, just cancelled the contract for the one I was supposed to be doing because I just haven't got time or headspace for it. But maybe one day I'll find time and headspace to think about maybe signing up for another book. And I think missing cities is a good topic. So do let me know if you think it's a terrible topic. Then I won't bother. Naomi says, good, I managed to get into this talk, albeit late. GIS is my speciality and area of work. Oh blimey, okay. Oh well. I hope you enjoyed it and didn't see too many faults in it. Naomi. Yeah, okay, thank you so much. Was it Mustafa Aga who lived in Luxor Temple, or was it his house at Karnak? No, you're absolutely right. It was Mustafa Aga, yes, who was the guy whose name I was forgetting, who acted as the consul for the British, the Russians, and one or two other countries, maybe Canada, and was also an antiquities dealer and a bit of a scoundrel as well. Yeah, I think that was his house. Kate, thank you very much for reminding me of that. Lots of books that Amy's either reading or got. That's good to know. Bjorn says, is there a way to digitally recreate Bubastis? Blimey, good question. There was a lovely drawing of the festival something of Azorkon II at Bubastis, which was excavated by Navil. The reconstruction was published in his volume, which makes me think that I wish I had included it in the talk now. I just ran out of time. Otherwise, Bjorn, I think probably the basic outline of the temple is established. Do you know what? Sadly, I've got to go to a memorial service for John Johnston actually tomorrow, and I imagine that a colleague of mine who used to work at Tel Basta will be there, and I will ask her, and I will endeavour to, if I can find an answer, I will let you know. Bjorn, good question. Rosemary, who I know is a bit of a Tel Basta expert, says, don't go to Bubastis expecting to see the stones. It's all been cleared. It's part of the site management programme, and there is now an open-air museum there for some of the interesting bits. Haha, interesting. Thank you, Rosemary. I haven't been to Tel Basta since 2015, so I'm obviously behind. Well, I've never seen the museum, and I know you have. There was you probably know, folks, that I've got more than 20 years ago, the Ministry of Antiquities under Zahi Hawass announced that there would be all these regional museums everywhere. It was a great idea, and in the ministry's offices in I forget if it was Abbasia or there was a Malek offices, they had all these framed pictures on a staircase of all the different museums that were going to open, and quite a lot of them have. So there's a very nice one in Sohag. There's one in, is there one in Kafr Sheikh? There's one in one of the Red Sea places. There's going to be one in Minya, although it hasn't opened yet. And the Tel Basta Museum was one of them. And the building went up ages ago. The building went up in it was up in 2009, I think. And then absolutely nothing happened. And then they put loads of plinths out for the sculpture garden, replacing a previous sculpture garden, which I'd been to in 2005. I think, and then nothing went on the plinths for ages. And I was quite friendly with the Tel Basta team for a while because the EES funded it for a few years while I was there as deputy director and then director. So I used to go out and visit the projects. And in fact, the last time I was there was visiting them in 2015, and they told me then, "Don't tell anyone I told you this." They told me then that the people behind the museum had asked the archaeologists to nominate pieces that could go on the plinths. So they had built the plinths before they decided what pieces were going to go on the plinths. I'm sure it all looks lovely now, but they had done things slightly the wrong way around. Anyway, I didn't tell you that. Deborah was joining late. I hope you caught up and enjoyed it, Deborah. Amy says, I love there's a TBC. Yeah, well, this is a story that's going to run and run, I think. Kate says, is there much or any information about Manetho's life? Not much, Kate, is the answer. We don't know what his name means, but it may be something to do, the Tho part may be something to do with Thoth, and it may be that it's not really his name, that it was something to do with the title, Thoth being, connected with wisdom and learning and writing, and perhaps that is how the writer of this history came to have that name. We know that he was, we think that he was from Sebennytos, actually the capital of the 30th dynasty. We believe that he may have been a priest, and that he may even have been chief priest of the sun god Ra at Heliopolis, which would have given him access to temple archives, which would have enabled his story. There's, if I remember rightly, there's an account, something connected with the statue from around the time of Ptolemy II or III, which allows us to place Manetho in that approximate period, but we can't even otherwise say exactly when he was writing. We only have his, I'm sure you know, we only have his Itj-tawy, his history of Egypt, from much later, what we call epitomes, copies. So we don't even know exactly what he wrote. But no. So in other words, we don't know huge about him. But Egyptian, probably a priest, probably from Sebennytos, probably writing in the early Ptolemaic, probably the reign of Ptolemy II or III. I think that's about all we can really say. Yeah. Renee says, great lecture. Thank you, Renee. Amy says, great lecture. Also, great to have 2 in a week. Yes. Thank you for joining the Pisa talk, AB. Really appreciate it. Bjorn says, thank you, Chris. Really love this lecture. One of my favorites. Oh, thank you, Bjorn. You're very sweet. And thank you for your little contribution. Very kind of you. Thank you. I hope you're enjoying yourself in Swansea. Good luck with it all, and keep letting us know how you're doing. Bjorn is well on his way to becoming an Egyptologist. So actually, whenever you want to take over these lectures, Bjorn, just let me know. Chrissy says, thanks again for a great lecture. Thank you, Chrissy. And thank you, Kate. I'm very excited to see these places too. Angela said, would make a great book. Thank you, Angela. I'll put you on the list of yeses. Yes, please, to a book. Joyce says, thanks, enjoy the lecture and looking forward to the trip. Me too. I look forward to seeing you there. Emily's looking forward to the Strabo talk. Thank you, Emily. Hope I could go on the tour and see in person. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, do come along. Yeah, I don't want this to turn into just one big advert for my tours, but so we are going next month. No secret. Obviously, quite a few of us online here going on that trip. It sold out very quickly, I'm very pleased to say. So AWT, the company, Ancient World Tours, are running it again in next December, I think. The itinerary is almost the same, but with 1 or 2 tweaks. So yeah, and as far as I know, there are still places available on that one, I think. But actually, I haven't spoken to AWT for a bit, so I could be wrong. But anyway, if that one sells out too, I wouldn't be at all surprised if there is a third iteration of it. I mean, as far as AWT were concerned, incidentally, this is meant to be a sort of successor trip to their very successful missing tombs, which we did 7 times in the end. It kept on selling, but we eventually decided that we really needed to have a change and do something different. So here we are, missing cities. And you would all be very welcome to come. It'd be great to see as many of you as possible. Naomi says, no major mistakes. Probably some minor ones. Did appreciate seeing all the maps. I love me some maps, as you can imagine. Yeah, I mean, me too, Naomi. Yeah, I like, as I mentioned, I like nothing more than fiddling about with satellite images and seeing what can be seen. Anne says, interesting to see how this changes after you go to Egypt. Yeah, well, and keep an eye on social media, because when it comes to the places I've not been to before, Ichnazia, Antinopolis, etc. Maybe one or two other places as well, depending on. I mean, you know, these things often. You often get surprises on these trips, nice surprises as well. Sometimes on these trips. So yeah, keep an eye on social media, because I will be taking photos and I'll be posting photos, particularly of things I've not seen before. Yeah. Naomi says, I do have a slightly silly question though, because I realise it may not exist, but I want to ask anyways. In the video game Assassin's Creed Origins, there's a lost city that was lost by being swallowed by the desert. Is that based on a real city, or is it completely fictional? The name was Letopolis. So I have played the game, but I was terrible at it, and so I did the educational free bits where you didn't really have to really play the game properly, and then when I tried to play it properly, I was terrible at it and didn't really get very far. So never got to that part. There is a city called Letopolis in ancient Egypt, which was in the Delta, I think. I don't know about the being swallowed by the desert thing. That sounds to me like the story of the Persian armies getting swallowed by the desert, but don't know. I'll see if I can look that up. Certainly Letopolis existed, but it may be that they've sort of mixed a bit of something fictional and something real. Assassin's Creed is really good, if I remember rightly, for providing information when you go to places, or you know, so you could sort of get information. If I still had access to the game, which I don't, and was able to play it and had access to Letopolis in the game, I would go and have a look to see if there's some information somewhere. I don't know if you're able to do that, but if not, maybe look up Letopolis, because it was a real place. Oh, lots of congrats for Bjorn. Excellent. Put me on the list of yeses too. Oh, thank you, Bjorn. Really must do at least one tour. I don't know if that's directed at me or who that's directed to. Bjorn has been on an AWT tour. Oh, studies starting on Monday. Ah, great. Good luck, Bjorn. Let us know how it goes. Yes, Naomi says, I do acknowledge the game could be entirely fictional. Games are great. In others, it's entirely absurd and historic fiction. Yeah, I thought it was overall, I thought it was really brilliant. I just wish I was better at games, but my friends from when I was at school will tell you that I was always terrible at them. Anyway, righty ho, folks. It's a long time past the point at which any of you can still be interested in this, surely. So I am going to wrap up. Thank you all again for being Lapis members, for being here, for supporting me, for supporting the channel. Really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed it today. Certainly the comments would seem to suggest that that was the case, which is really great. I'm really excited actually about the tour and about the Strabo lecture, because I'm really hoping all these things are going to come together nicely. Yeah, so see you all on the 16th, and see some of you perhaps on the 16th, and then also again a few days after that in the airport or a hotel or somewhere. Okie doke. Naomi says, I live stream another playthrough because I love the game and do another go. Oh, that would be cool. That was how our whole project started. Maybe drop me a line, Naomi, and we could set something up. I'm just insanely busy now for the next few weeks. I'm going to America on what day am I going to America? Tuesday. To go and do some lectures there. If you're in Rolla, Missouri, or Flint, Michigan, do come along and say hi. If you're in Glasgow, I'm losing track of everything, whenever that is, the 18th, I think, of October, come find me there. That'd be great. Otherwise, I'll see you all here. Cool. Oh, hello, Paul. Hello, Paul. I really enjoyed the Missing Tombs tour. It was great, wasn't it? Happy memories. Thank you for all those books you gave me. Right, okay, folks, I'm going. Lovely to see you all. Thanks for all your lovely comments, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.